From spooky legends past, down through generations, to haunted locations that hold a ghostly past. Come one, come all, come finders and seekers. Hear the creepy side of NEPA.
Hello and welcome to the Creepy Side of NEPA. I am Dan Kosloski. Before we get started with tonight's episode, I just have a few announcements to make. First, as always, if you haven't already, or maybe you just didn't have a chance, make sure you like, subscribe, or follow the Creepy Side of NEPA on whichever podcast platform that you're listening to us on. Would you like to keep up to date with all of our latest show information? Be sure to follow our Facebook page, WNEP's Creepy Side of NEPA. I just wanted to let all of our listeners know we will not have a normal monthly episode next month for September. We're taking a little bit of time off and we're trying to prepare ourselves for October. October will be back like we do every year for our weekly episodes. We will have a new episode every Thursday for the month of October. Let's waste no more time. Let's get right into tonight's episode. Tonight we are joined by Katie McVay. Katie is a paranormal investigator just outside of our viewing area, but she contacted us. She's a big fan of the show, and she had some very interesting stories she would like to share with us tonight. Katie, welcome to the show.
Hi, Dan. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thanks for joining us tonight.
Sure.
So you contacted us through our Facebook page from our friends at the Columns Museum. Is that how you heard about us?
Yeah, I heard about you through Tim Kelly. A little shout out for the Columns Museum and Tim Kelly. He introduced me to you guys, and that's how I reached out to you.
Yeah, Tim had some great stories also. I believe he was on the show about a year or so ago.
I believe so, yeah, and he shared that podcast with me, and he knows that town inside and out as well as that house inside and out. So, yeah, he's a great guy
Yeah,
to
that's
talk
for
to.
sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
So one of the questions I always ask paranormal investigators when they come on the show is, how did you get started with the paranormal? What sort of sparked your interest?
What sparked my interest? I guess it's a cliche answer, Dan, and that is, like most people, I had my first paranormal experience. And I was 16 years old, so a little bit older than I would think most people have their paranormal experience.
Yeah, it seems to happen a lot earlier, usually.
It does, right? Usually people are toddlers or 4 or 5 or they're 10 or 12. And I was a teenage girl. I was 16 years old. And so that's what kind of sparked it for me. And so I've been, following the paranormal for all these years, researching, watching the shows, just doing some independent stuff. And it just kind of snowballed from there. And then I became a paranormal investigator about 4 years ago.
So what was your personal experience that kind of sparked it all?
Well, it's an odd one. And to this day, Dan, I still can't even explain it. But I was in my bedroom late at night. I was sleeping, and I'm going to date myself here. And I'm going to tell you that I was listening to a Walkman.
Okay. So, I remember those.
Remember those?
Yep.
So this was probably 1990-ish, early 90s. And it was dark. I was falling asleep to my headphones from my Walkman. And I opened my eyes, and all of a sudden I saw this very bright, pulsating light in the corner of my bedroom. And my blinds were closed. My windows were closed. So I knew it wasn't a reflection from a car. I knew it wasn't any light on in my bedroom because I had all my lights out. And so I couldn't really explain it. And also it was pulsating. And it was about the size of a softball, I would say. And if that didn't scare me enough, it then started to travel and it started to move from the corner of my bedroom, and it started to come closer and closer to my face. And I knew I was awake. I had pinched myself, so I knew I wasn't dreaming. I knew I was wide awake. And this ball of light came over and literally stopped right in front of my face, probably within 6 inches of my face. And it just kind of hovered there. And it scared me so badly that I pulled the covers over my head and nearly suffocated myself and fell asleep that way. And I refused to pull the covers back down to see if it had disappeared.
I don't blame you, to be honest.
Yeah. And all of my years of independent research and my 4 years of ghost investigations, I have never experienced anything like that. So to this day, it's unexplained, and I don't know what it is.
So would you consider that kind of like an orb, I guess?
I guess now most people would consider that an orb. It did have its own light, so it was, a bright white light, and it was pulsating, so it was emanating its own light. So I guess you could call it an orb. Maybe some people now might call it a spirit of some sort, taking the shape of an orb.
Yeah, because when you normally hear of orbs, it's mostly like photographs and videos and stuff like that you'd see it on. Normally not in person. It doesn't seem like anyway.
Yeah, when people say orb, you're exactly right. I think that's what most people mean when they say orb. They take a picture on the camera or on a phone and they see a bright, usually white light, and they say, oh, look, an orb. You're right. It's usually not seeing it live described as an orb.
So that sort of sparked your interest into the paranormal. That definitely is an interesting story, that's for sure.
Yeah, like I said, I've never had anything happen to me like that before or since, to be honest. In all the places I've been, all over the country, all over the world, never had another experience like that. So to this day, it's still unexplained.
And you said that happened probably around the early 90s time period?
Yeah, I was a 16-year-old girl, so I was early 1990s. I was in high school. So yeah, early 90s.
Because it seemed like right around early 2000s, the whole paranormal subject kind of exploded. Once like ghost hunters and stuff launched their show on TV.
Right. Yeah. So back in the 90s, there was nothing like that on TV unless, there were other types of shows on there, like In Search of and shows like that. But you're right, nothing that really delved into ghost hunting specifically. So for me, yeah, as a young girl watching this ball of light, the first thing I didn't think of, oh, orb, or oh, that's paranormal.
Sure.
That word never even crossed my mind at the time.
So everything sort of took off from there. And then how did you get started with the whole ghost investigating? And you do a couple other things to tie into the paranormal also, it seems like.
I do. It all started with that incident. And like I said, it just kind of snowballed where I just started reading and watching in the 2000s, like you mentioned, when the ghost show thing kind of exploded. I started watching those, and I got to a point where I honestly kind of got tired of just seeing it on TV.
You kind of want to experience it for yourself. Exactly,
I wanted to experience for myself, and I decided it took a while. It took a while for me to do that, and actually took the death of my father for me to really spark that interest because, he passed away and I realized how fragile life was. And that experience really made me realize that there might be another side and there might be life after death. So that's what really pushed me into, okay, I need to explore this a little bit more. And I actually wanted, do ghost hunting. So that was really the impetus for me to push me in that direction of ghost hunting.
Very interesting. And how many investigations have you done over the years?
Oh gosh, I don't.
Quite a few.
Really couldn't tell. Quite a few. I actually, this may sound weird. I'm like this geeky person because I keep an Excel spreadsheet of all the places that I've been. I haven't investigated all the places on that list.
I don't blame you at all. I have to keep a sheet to realize who I interviewed over the years.
Oh, that's true. I bet you do. Yeah, record keeping is important.
So I could definitely relate.
I'm sure you can. Yeah, we all have spreadsheets and lists somewhere listing everything we do, right?
Yep.
So, yeah. But yeah, I would say, gosh, dozens. And most of that is, wasn't on my own. I went to events. I went to paranormal conventions, found people who, were renting out buildings for the evening and having ghost hunts, and I would just tag along. And that's really how I learned. You start at the bottom, and I just tagged along and just started learning and started buying some equipment and just really that's how it started, and that's how it went.
Now, normally when you go out, are you on your own or do you go out with a group?
In the beginning, I just kind of went out on my own because honestly, I didn't have a lot of friends who were into it as much as I did. And so I felt weird kind of dragging them along to a ghost hunt. So, because not everybody is into it, when you tell people, well, what do you do? I'm a ghost hunter. And they, you get one of two looks. Either people are like, oh my gosh, that's so cool, tell me about that. Or they kind of give you the side eye, like, you're weird. So in the beginning, I started going on my own. And because I kind of wanted to just do my own thing. and without interruptions and without interference. And so that's kind of what I did. And then as time went on, I was a part of a group for about 2 years, and we would travel around the country, the four of us, and we would investigate together. And then I kind of struck out on my own, and I was like, you know what? That's about the time that I started my own business, and I started hosting my own paranormal ghost hunts.
So do you host them for the public? Is that how that works?
I do, yeah. So I will rent out a facility. I'm trying to find new and different places to rent out, and I'll rent them out for an evening or for 2 evenings, and then I'll open up to the public and bring them in. And I usually have 1 or 2 investigators there with me to help me guide everybody through the evening.
So over your years of doing these investigations, has there have been any stories, especially now that you're doing them more for the public and stuff, has there been any stories or maybe a guest that you had in one of your investigations that sort of stuck with you?
Let me think. I would say the first 2 investigations that I ever hosted, I did one with Dustin Perry, who I think you probably know.
Yep, we actually had him on the show maybe about 4 or 5 months ago, beginning of the year.
That's right. I remember that because I did listen to that one because he was in your neck of the woods.
Yep, he was in the Strasburg area, I believe.
Right. The very first public ghost hunt that I hosted, he was my guest investigator. And we investigated an Irish pub in my neck of the woods in suburban Philadelphia. And it was a fun night. And I wouldn't say there were that was a quiet evening. So I wouldn't say there was too many experiences there. I would say for that place, it was more of like the collective energy, more so than any resident spirits that were there. It was more the collective energy of everyone who was there. You could feel that. And sometimes that happens. Sometimes you'll go to a location and it's quiet. The ghosts and the spirits don't want to come out and play. But you still feel that collective energy of all the people who are there, and you can kind of feel their energy, and it's still palpable, and it can still make for a really good evening. And
a lot of times it's the places where you think you would get the most action, nothing happens.
Correct. And you're spot on, because this investigation that I did with Dustin, I was expecting a lot of activity because it was a 200-year-old building. It had a lot of layers to it. It had a lot of history. It started out as a halfway house back in the early 1800s. It was a way station, and then it became a post office, and then it became a restaurant, and then it became an Irish pub. And so it had a lot of different layers to it, 250 years of history. So I was expecting a lot of activity, and it was kind of a quiet evening. And then, as you probably know as well as anyone, the reverse can happen. You go somewhere like, nothing's going to happen, and then boom, you have a really profound experience. And that's probably the second story I was going to tell you is that reverse, where I went in not expecting anything to happen because I was just in host mode. I was hosting this event, and I had one of the most profound experiences of my life at this facility. So I can tell you about that if you'd like.
Sure. Yep. So
this was maybe a little bit closer to your neck of the woods. It was actually out in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania.
Okay.
Which is Franklin County. And I hosted a ghost hunt there at the Chambersburg jail, the old Franklin County jail. And I had Shane Pittman and Josh Purvis from the Searchers with me on that event. And I was in host mode. They came in, they were my guest investigators, and I was just playing host for the evening, making sure everybody was okay, so forth and so on. And I decided to tag along, went to one area of the building in one of the area where the cells were.
Okay.
And this was an area of the building where women were housed. Out of nowhere, I started to feel this really intense sadness overtake me. And I felt almost like Whoopi Goldberg in that movie Ghost, where she becomes possessed by the spirit of Patrick Swayze. That's kind of how I felt, because I felt this female presence, whom I later identified herself to me as a female inmate, kind of possessed me. And I started to feel her sadness and feel her pain. And she slowly kind of started to tell me her story. And so she was kind of filtering her information and her life through me. And I could feel that. I have never had that experience happen to me ever.
Wow.
And so that left me shaken. That left me, I had to leave the building, and I had to regroup myself, because that was just so profound of an experience for me.
And was that more recently, or is that early on when you first started doing these investigations?
That was recent. That was just 2 months ago in early May. Yeah, that was really recent. So, and it was one of those things, again, kind of going back to what we talked about, how you go to a quiet location expecting it to be quiet and it's busy, or you go to a busy location, it's quiet. I went to this building not really expecting anything, and then boom, out of nowhere, I had one of the most profound experiences I've ever had. And you travel all over the country sometimes, going to all of these places that everybody hears about.
Yep.
And here I am at this little jail in the middle of Pennsylvania, and boom, I have one of the most profound experiences of my life. So you just never know. And that's kind of what I love about this and what I do, is that you just show up and you just never know what to expect, and expect anything. And I love that.
You expect anything. And also, another thing I noticed after doing this show for a while, even the people who don't believe in the ghost or the paranormal, they all say whatever about it. They all have a story that they can't explain that happened to them at some point.
Absolutely. And I think the paranormal shows really helped open that gate a little bit. I think it became a little bit more acceptable. I think the stigma has decreased. And you're exactly right, because now more and more when I tell people, oh, what do you do? Oh, I'm going on a ghost hunt this weekend. I don't have that. I don't want to say shame. That's not the right word, but I don't have that hesitation to tell people, oh, I'm going on a ghost hunt.
Right.
Because you're right. They're like, ooh. I mean to tell you, Dan, I can't tell you how many times I've said that to just the average person who's not even involved in that whole world. And they're like, oh, I need to tell you about this experience that I had the other night at my house. So you're right. Everybody has a story.
Yep. We did an episode early on in this series where we had some listeners call up with their stories, and we had everyone from teachers to state policemen to share their own stories. And it's just amazing that everybody, even if they don't say they believe, they still have something to share.
Yeah, all walks of life, right? It doesn't matter who you are, where you live. Yes, you have a story. That's great. I'm going to go back and listen to that one, because that one sounds really cool.
Yeah, like I said, it was early on. It might have been it was definitely in our top first 10 episodes. I forget the number. It was early on, though.
Okay, I'm going to go back and I'm going to find that. And I'm going to listen to that one.
So, what is your favorite way to investigate? Do you like using the equipment, or are you more a hands-on approach?
I had this conversation recently with somebody, and I know that a lot of people love all the equipment and all the gadgetry, and I do too. I just never really took to all of it, Dan. If you were to hand me like a camera or something, I wouldn't know how to work it. I'm just not technologically minded. I'm more of a feeler. So I'll go into a place and I like to use, my body as an instrument. I like to use my physical body as in the antenna. So I use my ears, smell things, hear things, feel things, taste things even. And that's kind of how I do things. And I'm very low tech, I'm very low key. So if I do bring equipment, it's very easy to operate. So I have an EVP recorder. Maybe I'll take some old school dowsing rods. I will take a pendulum, and maybe I'll use a pendulum. I have an EMF detector, but it's all very simple and very plain. And that's kind of my chosen method. I kind of use my body as the antenna, and I use minimal equipment.
Yeah, it seems like every investigator has their own style.
Yes, you're right. And that's the other thing I love about this field is that, we're all snowflakes. We're all a little bit different. You're right. Everyone has their own way of investigating, and it's good, because if we were all the same, there would be no advancements in this field.
Sure.
So the fact that we're all different, we all have different investigation styles, we all think differently, we all have different gifts that we can bring to the table too, it really has blown the doors wide open on this field. And you're right, I love that.
So over your years of being into the paranormal, what was your favorite location you were at?
My favorite location? Well, I'm going to be a little bit biased because I am a Pennsylvania girl.
So are we. We're Pennsylvanians.
Exactly. That's kind of why I mentioned it too. I have to say Gettysburg. And I know, Dan, that's going to sound like such a cliche canned answer, but Gettysburg has just such a magic to it. the whole town itself is just, there isn't just one building in that town. It's the whole town. The whole town, and I know it's been done to death. I know it's been on all the ghost shows, and I know it's been investigated by everybody a million times over, but there's a reason for that. It's a special magical place. Yes, there were some terrible things that happened there. It is a tragedy. But it is still a beautiful place, that people go to, with reverence. And it's one of my favorite. I can't even tell you that I had a lot of profound experiences there, just little things here or there, but just the energy and the magic that you feel there, it's very palpable when you go there.
It's funny that you said that, because the beginning of this month, the beginning of July, we had a 3-part mini-series on the other podcast series that we do, the Creepy Side of America, and just hearing some of the stories from that town are pretty amazing.
That's right. You did mention that to me. I'm excited to watch that. You said it's a three-parter? It's
a 3-part podcast, yep. So we had 3 different interviews with different people from the town, and just hearing their stories is pretty amazing of everything that's in that small town.
Yeah, that's great. I'm going to go back and listen to that too, because you're right. There's something to that place. It's just an amazing place, and it's one of my favorites. Again, not a place that I've had a lot of, experiences or profound experience. It's just the whole atmosphere when you're there.
And one other thing I don't want to forget to mention, I know you were saying how you were friends with the people at the Columns Museum, and you did have an experience or 2 there. I just wanted to see if you would like to share those.
Sure. So I've been there twice for 2 different investigations. That's how I met Tim Kelly, who
Yep, he was a guest on a little while ago.
Yep, and I listened to his podcast. It was great. He has a lot of great stories. So the first time I was there, I was actually there with a group called Full Moon Paranormal. They're based in New York.
Okay.
And they hosted a public ghost hunt there, and that was they're friends of mine, and they're a great group. And they hosted a ghost hunt there, and that was my first time there, and that's where I met Tim. And that evening, that place, as you know from talking to Tim, has a lot of layers to it. There's a lot of history there, and there are definitely some resident spirits that are there, residual, who just kind of go through life, going through their thing. And that night that I was there, my first time there, I just remember feeling this female energy, and she was just kind of following me around all night. And I just kind of picked up on her. And I think that in talking to Tim, Mr. Historian, that it was Julia who was the wife of the owner of the home. And she seems to be very protective, if I remember, of the house. And I remember seeing shadows out of the corner of my eye. Like every time I went into a room, I would just see this kind of shadow pass by me. So that was the one experience that I had. Again, it was nothing, negative or bad. It was just a presence that was there that was just kind of following us around, just kind of seeing what we were doing. And it kind of appeared as like a shadow figure out of the corner of my eye. So that was interesting. And then the second experience that I had was more recent. I was just there in April, full moon again, and they had a public ghost hunt. And this time was a little bit different because, as you probably know, that the Columns is home to the Lincoln flag. And the Lincoln flag is apparently the flag that was used under Lincoln's head after, he was shot at Ford's Theater. They used this flag and they put it under his head as they transported him across the street where he eventually passed. So they have this flag. So that night of this investigation, we did an EVP session, and we were actually calling out to Abraham Lincoln, and we were pretending like we were at a mock funeral for him. And every participant there acted like we were attending his funeral.
That's an interesting approach.
It was a very interesting approach, and I'll give a shout out to Brian Cano because he was there. He was the guest investigator, and he came up with that idea, and it was brilliant. Tim even said that they had never done anything like that before, where it was kind of a mock ceremony and a mock funeral for Abraham Lincoln, and each of us walked up to the flag as if it was him. And we said condolences, we said something to him, we prayed to him, we did whatever we felt was appropriate. And then we just kind of stepped off, and we recorded it the whole time. And when we played it back, we got a lot of voices that we think that were we're maybe not Abraham Lincoln, of course, but we're definitely some residual spirits that were either in the house or some other voices from the past who knew Lincoln. And I can't honestly, I can't remember what they said. I didn't
Right.
record it. Still, it was just a profound experience to have these voices come through. It was, and it's rare as a paranormal investigator to get so many EVPs. We must have gotten at least 8 or 10
Wow.
EVPs
On the
from
same
that.
location?
Yes, just in that one session alone. So that's pretty amazing because you probably know a lot of times when you go on ghost hunts, if you catch 1 or 2 good EVPs, that's a good night.
Yep.
So for us to capture that many in one EVP session was pretty interesting to us. So it tells us that, that there's definitely a lot of reverence for the flag and for the house and for Abraham Lincoln and everything that, the country went through.
And that's probably one of the worst parts about investigating is going through the evidence.
Absolutely. Yeah. You ask any ghost hunter or paranormal investigator, they will tell you that is the worst part. And that usually kicks in when you're packing up your gear at the end of the night and you're driving home and you think, oh man, I know what's next.
So the other question that popped into my head as you were talking about your last experience, you were talking about a little bit about negative or bad experiences. Mm-hmm. Over your time ghost investigating, have you experienced any negative or bad?
I only experienced negative or bad once, and I even hesitate to say negative or bad because I don't know if I'm still on the fence, Dan. I'm not quite sure if I believe in negative energy. I'm still kind of exploring that, but I will say another kind of cliche place, the Conjuring House. Everybody's heard of the Conjuring House, right?
Of course, yep.
And I investigated there, and I had a pretty interesting experience that left me and the people that I was with rattled. And I don't want to call it negative, or we might say low vibrational, but it definitely didn't feel good. I guess I can put it that way. So, and a lot of people know the Conjuring House. They're familiar with the history, that it's not just the house, it's the surrounding land itself. And people talk about, portals and vortexes on the property, which I would totally agree with, having investigated there now. But my experience was down in the basement, and we were doing a spirit box session where basically you set up a spirit box and you use white noise to allow the spirits to come through and talk to you. We were asking questions, and this voice kept on coming through, and the voice sounded exactly like our lead investigator, like down to the tone of her voice.
That's a little creepy.
It was very creepy, and we call that mimicking. And if you were to say mimicking or mimicry to any paranormal investigator, they might cringe a little bit, because usually that's not good. You hear stories sometimes where voices come through of little kids, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, oh, it's a little kid. It very well could be a little kid coming through to talk to you, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's some other entity that's coming through as a child to kind of lure you in.
Yeah, that's a chance you're kind of taking there.
That's definitely a chance that you take. So when I was down in the basement in the Conjuring House, we had this voice coming through. It was mimicking the lead investigator, almost mocking her. It did not feel good. Definitely didn't make any of us feel, it made all of us feel very uneasy. And the lead investigator actually took her outside because she was rattled. And so she had to step outside to regroup herself because she was so affected by that experience.
Over my experience talking to many ghost investigators, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of negative experiences out there. It seems like there's definitely some, but it just seems like most aren't.
You're right. And I totally agree that I think a lot of it might be perpetuated for obvious reasons. But in my experience, 99.999% of the time, what you're dealing with are humans. Or people who were human at one time. So they're not negative. They're not bad. They're not nefarious. They don't have, a negative MO. They were just people, just like you and me, who were either residual spirits who just kind of wandering through that space like they always did when they were alive, or they are more intelligent and they interact with you. But yeah,
Might be a little mischievous, but that's about it.
Yeah, exactly. And I've had mischievous things too, happen where, things they kind of whisper in your ear or they tug your hair
Yep.
or things like that. But yeah, you're right. I think most of the things that I've encountered, no, I would say all of the things I encountered were all just normal, regular, run-of-the-mill spirits. Now, maybe they weren't so nice people in real life, and so they brought that energy with them into the afterlife. But that doesn't necessarily make them, bad people.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
Yeah.
So if anyone was interested in maybe doing one of your investigations or learning more about your business, how would they get in contact with you? Do you have a website or on Facebook?
Yeah, so I have a website, and my own business is called Tamerlane Media. So anyone wanting more information about me and what I do, they can go on to tamerlanemedia.com. On there, I list my upcoming events. I have 3 upcoming events that I'm really excited about. I am on Instagram at PoGirl Paranormal, and I do have a Facebook page as well.
Okay, I'd like to thank you for reaching out to us tonight. It was great talking to you.
Thanks, Dan. I really appreciate your having me on there. That's great. Thank you.
I appreciate you joining us. Thank you. Have a great night.
Thanks, you too.
Thank you for listening to the Creepy Side of NEPA. Remember, there won't be an episode in September. We're just taking a little bit of time off to prepare for our October season. Once October hits, we'll have a new episode out every Thursday. Until then, enjoy the Creepy Side of NEPA.
This has been the Creepy Side of NEPA. If you have a spooky story that took place in northeastern or central Pennsylvania, send it to ghost@WNEP.com for your chance to share it on an upcoming episode. We're dying to hear from you.